if you read the description, it's more about me all my life wanting to. I think it's a very common thing that a lot of women who've grown up with my generation, okay, with certain amount of resources, feel, which is, I think at some point in my life, I was like, if I could just live the life of a man, that will be the best life, right? So I think that is how I have lived a lot of my life. That trying to get into an IIT or an IIM, and getting the jobs that they get, getting the freedom that they get, getting to live the life that. So that was the idea. I would look at my father and I would think that, you know what, between my father and mother, this is the better life, and I really want to get that life. And somehow, I've been so blessed that I reached a point where I was like, okay, you know what, I've put the tick marks. I've got the life I wanted. But that when it starts feeling that, oh my God, this also doesn't bring you any joy. A, you see all the men living that life are also depressed. And B, you realize there's been a cost to it, that you've actually given up a lot of things that were softer, nicer about you, to come here. And now all these reels, all these YouTube videos are telling you that, oh, whatever is wrong in your life is because you lost your feminine essence, that you're not in your feminine, that you've gone too much in your masculine, on the dates you're trying to pay money. Okay, so that is where it comes from. The that is the origin story of the show. Uh, See, again, I think that way, Man of the House was me talking about the. It really is a prequel to the show where I was trying to articulate my frustration and being in a position, because my father is not there anymore. He passed away. So by default, it so happened that in my family there's a power void. There is a. I have my mother. It's me and my younger brother, and somehow because I make the most money, I get to be man of the house once in a while. But then there are other parameters on which they are men of the house. And then the thing is, even when I get to be in a position of power, I realize that, oh, this comes with a lot of hang-ups. I am not enjoying it because there's so much stress, and no wonder my father was so stressed all the time. So that was one part of the epiphany. The other part of the epiphany, though, also is that, which is, as women, living at in a time where we actually have way more freedom compared to our earlier generations. Like, I have a lot more freedom compared to my mother, compared to my grandmother. But I think a lot of patriarchy is inside our heads, where my society is not holding my legs on my limbs, but something inside me is what I have to fight. When you watch these reels, I keep mentioning reels because that is where I consume most of my information, knowledge, humor, or culture. Yeah. So when I see these women in these, reels saying that, you know what, you have lost your feminine essence, or you have forgotten how to be a woman, or you, more importantly, you've forgotten how to be in your receiving. Okay, that you're not open to receiving anymore. How will love come to you if you can't receive it? So all that, you realize that, you know what, in this struggle, in this whole struggle to get power, become stronger in society, to create a name for yourself, you've been in a battle against yourself also. You've actually, you've not been aligned, or you've not stepped back to think, what do you really want? So even though I felt at some point that even though I'm flipping the script, I'm not getting married the way they want me to get married, I'm not doing X, I'm not doing Y, I'm still following a script, because in order to rebel also, I'm trying to be like, you know what, I hate men now. Okay, you know what, I can be as strong as you, I can be as emotionless as you. So it's such a it's funny trap for, for a lot of us modern women. So that is the transition between that show and this show, and that is the frustration that continues from this show to that show. Oh, I think, as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of us, not just women, men and women both, who've grown up in specifically Desi Indians, right? That our parents did so much. There's also that pressure that we need to be financially stable, financially secure, because that is the only way we can live up to, the sacrifices they have done for us. And I think it's true for men, women, everyone. But I think with women, there is this added layer that, with some men, for example, if they start feeling, for my brother, he had this feeling that he will do better as a writer, as a singer, instead of, following the path my parents were setting out for him. And he started talking about it or fighting for it at a much younger age. For me, I was always just so thankful that I am getting an opportunity so many women don't get. I was like, you know what, so many, and I had picked it up from society around me that, so many women don't even get a chance to go to post grad. They have to get married at a certain age. My parents are so supportive. They are doing, they letting me study, letting me have a job that I want, not forcing me to get married. So I think, for me, the kind of thinking that a lot of men would do at 25, that wait a second, what do I want to do? I started doing it at 30, where I was like, you know what, now I have actually put all the tick boxes. I've done my MBA also. I've earned for 5 years also. I've bought a house. I'm paying EMI. Okay, so all what you guys wanted me to do, I've done. Plus, at the same time, the only thing I've not done for you is marriage, which also I don't know how it'll happen. But everything else I've done, I put the tick boxes, and I have enough savings. And I think, even then, I know that when I was taking this leap from financial security to a place of, financial, what do you call it, insecurity or financial, not no ambivalence, right? um, I think, the one thing that also ironically played a role was that, my father was not around at the time. Like, if my father was still there, probably I would have still not I would have mentally felt that I still owe him the life that he dreamt for me. But because he was not there, I was free to take risks and experiment. Also, I'm guessing what happens is that, some of us know who go through an aberration in their life. For example, I lost my father. You didn't have a father growing up. We also become people who question the norms more. We like, right, because I think everyone has a normal, and that normal is really pays for them, and then really brings them all the stability they need. We have actually dealt with what the society calls abnormal, the kind of family that is not ideal, the kind of pressure that are not ideal. And because we have survived those, I think we do develop a muscle which makes us take bigger risks, or which makes us think that maybe what the society is defining as good or normal is too basic, and maybe I can take the leap. So I think that muscle also really helped when I was making this decision. So yeah, I think all of it came together at one point. Uh, yeah, very good. That's a very good question, actually. I also think about it a lot, because a lot of times the bit comes to me very easily, but when I start thinking about it and editing it, that is where the challenge comes. So I think my process typically is, mostly that something that I've been, even if it's a story, it's a story I'm telling my friends a lot. Like, there's some story I'm talking to you, which is chilling, and I think of a story and you laugh a lot. That becomes the starting point of a bit sometimes. That, oh my God, while I'm telling the story, I realize that, oh, if this could make her laugh, probably there's potential, in this bit, and maybe I can try it to the audience. So the first time I try a bit, similarly, if it's not a story, if I'm just ranting to you about my love life, if I'm just ranting to you that, what, these men, they are like this, and somewhere I see a reaction which is less concern, more humorous, where I'm like, oh, she's actually enjoying my rant. Okay, so then I'll make a mental note, and basically a very real conversation typically is the starting point for a bit, where whether it's a story, whether it's a rant, I make a mental note while talking to people, and then I go and start an open mic in its very raw form. And then once I get a reaction from people where I know, oh, this angst is very universal, or this story, actually, I'm talking to them about something that happened during Diwali time in my house, but somehow all of them can see their homes or their festivals in this. That is when I start developing it. And in developing it, that is when I lay it out. I figure out that, okay, you know what, this is where jokes can be added. So at this beat, I can expand it further. I can add a joke. I can add some tags. I can probably use a metaphor and take them to a different thing and then come back. So all the craft part comes literally like after I've tried the bit a few times in the editing, and that's, I think, that's the skill you acquire after doing it for 7 8 years. That editing is all the skill actually comes in editing. The origin point of the bit is typically very human and very abstract. It's how I would have, how it would have happened to me even in the beginning of my career. But yes, I'm a better editor of these stories now. Really, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to put it in words, but it actually, so I think to answer one part of the question, that definitely I had a major fear of public speaking. And I always thought of stand up as something which would also not be my thing because it is public speaking. But I think what happens in stand up for a lot of us is that when you're on stage, you actually drop the baggage of this identity. Of course, you carry the humor, you carry the stories, but all what makes you feel conscious or weird about who you are offline or off stage, sometimes, to me, definitely it happens. And I think I was also comfortable with stage because I used to do dance and theater. That never was a problem. Only public speaking was a problem. So I had no fear of being seen, but while talking, I would get very conscious of my language, my pronunciation, my accent, and whatnot. So the thing with stand up is that weird is appreciated. I think that also really is a big barrier breaker. That in an office, when I'm giving presentation, I'm very conscious because I'm like, you know what, all these people, they pronounce these words correctly. They talk a certain way. They're smoother. They don't fumble. They don't speak as fast as I do. But when I'm doing stand up, it's very freeing to know that this jumbling, fumbling, this way, the way I speak, the way I pause, everything that is weird about me actually adds to the entertainment. So that makes a huge difference. And I think when I started stand up, I could not. At that time, if you asked me this question, I would not have answered it this way, because this is the kind of understanding you have only when you look back. You're like, oh, that is what happened. That time, I just went on stage, and suddenly, when I heard the first laugh, it suddenly made me very, not conscious. I suddenly became too free, and I felt like, oh, this something magical has happened. Yeah, I was so afraid of public speaking, and my first open mic, I'm feeling very free. It was also a female open mic. It was also an open mic that Sumukhi was hosting. I remember a very small set, a small set of people. Sumukhi was hosting it. A lot of other female comedians there. This is back in 2016 or 17, and the atmosphere was so comfortable because of all these women, and then Sumki was so encouraging that I just forgot all my nervousness. One second. I just forgot all my nervousness or all my hang-ups because it felt like I'm among a bunch of sisters, among a bunch of friends. So it just came out very naturally. And I think once that one event then led to other set of good events, so there's no looking back. But what I said earlier, that it is very true about stand-up, that your weirdness really is very accepted, and that's why a lot of us feel way freer, as stand-up comics, as otherwise, uh, compared to what we would have been if we were trying to do presentations or public speaking more formally. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. So I think the show, I talk about it in a lot of detail in the show. But basically, the line I wrote in the description comes from the fact that when you're growing up, you try to not let certain influences affect you. Like, when we're growing up in this world where we have access to TV or internet or the modern world, we're like, you know what, mere ghar mein all these chachi mummies who say these things which are very conservative, I won't let that affect me, or I won't let these TV serials affect me, or I won't let this culture affect me. So we try to take influence from other people. Like, my role model used to be this woman who was very well accomplished, who had done a lot. Or my role model would be a Bollywood actress, or basically I had these female heroes. And the irony though is that when you grow up, you realize even those heroes were flawed in certain ways, right? That the woman who was a super achiever at work also had probably a belief system which would probably contradict you in certain ways. Okay, probably this super achiever aunt I had was obsessed with the idea of marriage still. Okay, she was like, whatever you do, marriage has to be done. Okay, similarly, a lot of my popular icons, okay, Bollywood actresses, people I would look up to, would disappoint me once in a while by doing something, by either. I don't know, doing a role that was very cringe or marrying someone I don't like. Okay, so it also is a story of how you get influenced by people who are very flawed, even when you're trying to discard certain influences. So as a grown up woman, when you look back, you're like, oh my god, then like, so the entire universe has conspired to make me this or what? Like the entire universe has given me influences that have just fucked me up, because that have just made me a crazy person now. Because the men I fell in love with, all of them influenced me. They were so incorrect. Okay, my father inspired me. My father also so flawed. My mother inspired me. Mother also so flawed. The women I looked up to also so flawed. Politics, leadership, religion, everyone. You used to love J.K. Rowling, but J.K. Rowling also flawed. So that's the idea, that when you, if at some point in your 30s you start looking back at what really was bad influence, you'll find many bad influences. Like, they're just too much bad influence you've grown up with. And of course, it's not fair to assign blame, but that is where comedy comes from. That, you know what, you made me like this. See, in my public shows, because the only good thing about being a female voice is that, if you bash men, a lot of it typically is punching up, because they really have made our life so difficult for so many years. So, so that way, a lot of times when I'm actually performing, so when I'm performing in public shows like in London or in metro cities in Mumbai or across the world, I think and because my voice also, the way I write is fairly, I would say that it's very PG-13. So I don't have a vocabulary of cuss words. I don't have vocabulary that can offend people generally. And once in a while, I use those words for effect. But that way, I'm very confident of my content. With my audience, people who buy tickets for me, because I know I'm funny and I won't offend them. But to answer your question, when I have to perform for example, when I have to perform for an office crowd, when I'm called to a college, like an engineering college, where it's a bunch of boys watching, or it's a manufacturing plant where all the employees are men. What I realize is that a lot of my jokes are coming from a woman's experience. And beyond a point, men don't have patience for that. Like, if a man is watching this show with his girlfriend, with his mom, with his sister, they'll fully enjoy it, because it's how women enjoy jokes on wives, because your husband is sitting with you and you're like, okay, of course, okay, we have this dynamics. So all the men who come to my shows with their partners, with their families, they enjoy. But if you put a bunch of men together and I do the same show, they will be with me out of politeness for some time. But after that, they're like, "Bhai, yeah, how much will she cry?" Okay. So, like, you talk about us, talk about, give some office jokes. So I have to customize it there, because I think the hard learning has been that in these setups, people don't want to know your experience. They want it to be about their experience. The same show, if I'm going to, like, to form in an office which is all women, okay, like around Women's Day, or sometimes the same show fully work, because whatever I'm saying about myself is true for them also. But with men, I have to, that is where I have to customize. That is when I'm like, okay, what do college boys like? Okay, what is the topic I can bring in? Okay, Elon Musk, Twitter, whatever. Okay, whatever can be the thing that can sort of get their attention. Crypto. Okay, so I have to customize like that. Or when I go to office, I talk about appraisals or HR, or how you hate your boss. So that is what I do. But otherwise, for my public shows, for my ticketed shows where people buy tickets and watch me, I know they've seen my content online. They're signing up for it. So that is when I have to make no efforts. Even men who come to my show are men who know they will enjoy the show. So it's yes, yes. So for a South Asian audience, to be honest, I have to because earlier I started this tour with London, the same show, Divine Feminine, and that time I came with my Hindi show and I had to do nothing because the people who sign up for to watch a Hindi show, all South Asians in London, they understand everything, every context. Even if they come with partners who sort of follow Hindi but don't speak it, they also get all the context. They also have some understanding of the words. But with this English version of the show that I am, I went to Edinburgh with, and which is happening in London this time, where basically I'm actually wanting to cater to a more global audience, where the idea is that I don't mind it if some people who are not Southeast Asian also come and watch it and consume it. So I definitely have to explain a few things context wise, because for a Bollywood actress, for example, if I'm mentioning an Alia, Deepika, Kangana, to a Southeast Asian audience, they fully like I have to say nothing more. Or if I have to even say that my Taiji, or my Chachi said something, the picture is clear in their head that this is the typical role of this kind of relative in your life. But for a more global audience, I have to, even if it's a Bollywood actress, I have to give context that this is the history. This is why I have emotions towards this actress. Or if I, for example, talk about, this aunt of mine who had this influence, I have to explain that typically this kind of aunt has this kind of influence. But the great thing is that also becomes a great fertile ground for jokes. I have to, for example, I used to have this joke. I still have this joke about when I joke about Delhi pollution, pollution in Delhi, and for an Indian audience, it's a given. Like I can just talk about Delhi and then start from the third pollution joke. But when it's a global audience, they don't even understand the meaning of AQI because it's so irrelevant to them. Like their countries are so not polluted that they are not measuring their AQI. So I had to actually someone gave me feedback that this AQI word you keep saying, that you just assume people. I'm like, oh, you guys don't measure pollution, and they're like, no, because it's not a problem here. So, so in Edinburgh, I had to make all those tweaks. I had to actually carry some visual references also, so that they get it with one picture. Because as I say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So so if I just put a picture, oh, this is what that she's talking about. So I did that, and it was a fun exercise. That is why I really think that I should do this exercise once in a while, because it really also opens my brain. It makes me think laterally. So yeah. I think the good thing right now is that the ecosystem has become stable and good enough for you to enter and experiment. There are enough open mics, the enough women already who can make you feel comfortable. I think my advice would again be, on the same point that we discussed earlier, that we have to break our mental barriers, where comedy is a lot of people who sustain careers in comedy are people who can actually who have a thick skin against humiliation. Okay, in the sense that you have to go on stage every day and every day try jokes, and a lot of them will not work. Sometimes the best thing you say also will not work. And as women, we have been programmed to be so self-conscious, so conscious of how people see us and perceive us, that something that would break a man after 10 failures, 10 humiliation would take it for a man to register, oh, do they have a problem with me? Okay, for us, we are so cued into people's reactions that the first time they reject us, we'll be like, oh my god, maybe something is horribly wrong with me and I should not attempt it. So, and that is something which is not good for us in any profession. The kind of cockiness men have is also not great. Okay, but somewhere there is something, some balance in the middle where we need to get to. Whereas women, so in comedy, I keep saying this, that the of course joke writing is a skill, performance is a skill, but the people who sustain the longest career, the people who have a very who have thick skin and a very erect spine, in that sense that if I want to do this, I will keep doing it, even if it is humiliating, even if they reject me a lot, and I won't make it about me. I will keep myself detached in the sense that, okay, this joke they did not like, I will change the joke. It doesn't. It doesn't make me a bad joke writer. It doesn't make me a failed person. So I feel as women, we need to really, really learn that a bit from men, because that is the only thing. They do it to an extreme, but they do it, they do it in a way that is helpful for them. So that we need to do. Okay? A lot of women, okay, just come and just stick around and don't take it personally. Don't take it personally is the key word, key line. Okay. A What I think it works two ways. That I think when I started doing this show, I started feeling less alone. When I started doing this show, I started feeling like, oh, this is just not my story. This is everyone's story, and I because again, we are in a generation where a lot of us feel like this is a very unique experience, and but a lot of us are going through the same experience. We just don't. There are no movies talking about it. There are not enough cultural not enough cultural content that is about, because it's a new phenomena that a lot of women are single, a lot of women can't even figure out how to even like tolerate a man. Okay, a lot of women have so much, have earned so much in life, but are still struggling with this weird unhappiness. So I just feel that the way this show made me feel less alone, it makes my audience also see that, oh, we are a community, we're all going through this together. And I'm not offering any solutions. Okay, and I don't know if there will be a solution in our generation, but at least we can laugh at it together, like all of us are in this together. Our rage, our angst, maybe the people who we are angry at will never listen to it or address it, but we have each other to, to come to talk about this, to, to feel things and to actually feel like, okay, we this is our common thing. Okay, we are doing this together, and I think that really made a difference to my life. So that way I feel, if even two people in the room can feel like that, it'll be a win.